Hello, wellness friends. Today I'm here with Mr. Rick Pounds. He is the owner of Associates in Rehab, and we're going to talk a little bit about FCEs and what they are and how you can possibly add those to your practice to help monetize your practice a little bit more efficiently. So, Rick, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Happy to be here. Glad to have you in the clinic.
Rick, can you give us a quick overview of what a functional capacity?
Absolutely, but let me first say, because this causes some confusion from time to time, particularly with physicians and particularly early on. An FCE is not a medical test.
Okay.
It is not diagnostic. You can't develop a prognosis. It doesn't determine causation. It doesn't determine MMI, impairment rating, disability ratings. What it does do is, in a very systematic way, determine what somebody's functional or work capabilities are, regardless as to whether they have an impairment. What are their abilities? What can they do? And that needs to be measured in a functional assessment.
Okay. So obviously the machine that's behind us is part of what you use to do an evaluation.
That's correct.
But one thing I did want to tell, or have you tell people, is this is a revenue generator for your practice.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of physical therapy clinics, practitioners, because reimbursements have gotten so low, it's harder and harder to make it as a business. So this has really helped you stay afloat during these times. Can you give me a little sense of how important the FCEs are to your revenue in your clinic?
Oh, without question, it's the main driver. You know, as you mentioned, in the world of reimbursement, anybody in practice will tell you that it seems to get worse each year as insurance companies begin to dictate what a therapist, not what they can charge, but what they're going to pay.
Right.
What they charge is irrelevant. They set a fee, and that's all they will pay. So, in terms of the FCE business, it has been the primary, at least in our clinic, revenue generator. Let me explain it this way. The billing density of what we get reimbursed for a functional or work capacity evaluation is equal to the therapist seeing about 13 to 14 patients.
Okay.
So the therapist would have to see 13 to 14 patients and get reimbursed what we get reimbursed on one eval.
Right.
So it has been the primary revenue generating source within the practice. And for practices who are looking for additional revenue sources, highly recommend them considering doing a well done FCE.
So one of the reasons I'm here today talking to Mr. Pounds is a lot of PT practices are feeling the pinch of not getting the reimbursements that they used to get, and maybe are looking for other sources of revenue. You've probably done more FCEs than most people, so you've got a lot of experience and you've done several thousand of these. Why don't you think more PT practices utilize FCEs?
I've never understood that. Now that's good for me,
Right.
But you know why they are not doing them, I couldn't tell you. I think one of the things may have been the initial expense of the equipment. There are a number of FCE tools on the market. However, that's where you got to be careful. All of the tools on the market will typically measure static and dynamic strength, some range of motion, various other positional body positions and postures. However, the ERGOS Work Simulator is the only tool on the market that utilizes cross-validation, inter-test reliability, and cognitive distraction to be able to determine most reliably what an individual's real abilities are. For example, if you're not measuring the same biomechanical motions and movements in various places with cognitive distraction, you don't know that you're getting good effort. And so typically when a physician, a case manager, an adjuster, an employer, an attorney, whomever makes a referral for an FCE, they want to know what are the abilities of this individual so we can match them to their job or or any job, or if we got to, or if the physician needs the data to set restrictions. But if you don't get a good, reliable effort, then they're just guessing. And unfortunately, too many folks make what I call designated guessers. And so to be able to get that reliable data, you have to test the same biomechanical motions and movements in multiple places, or you've got no way of knowing whether you got a good effort or not. And if you don't get a good effort, you're not going to have good data to make good decisions.
So it's sort of like you've got a machine here that measures something objectively. Some of the other tests or some of the other ways to do FCE is more subjective, based on how you perceive the effort that the person gives.
Yeah,
and that's hard.
Some of the other systems play into a lot of subjective complaints, which is another reason, which would be an indication for getting an FCE, is when you've got all these subjective complaints and no objective medical or clinical findings, and you're trying to get somebody back to work. And so the other systems may measure a particular movement or motion correctly in one place, but you don't know if that's a maximum effort. For a brief example, with this particular tool, with lifting, they'll lift in one place to their maximum abilities, and it's evaluee driven, in that at any point they say, I can't do anymore, we stop, we move on. I can't make anybody do more than they want to or can. However, an hour and a half to 2 hours later, they're going to do very much the same thing as they just did. And so, if, say for example, if someone were to terminate their lifting at one particular station with, let's say, 10 pounds, but do 70 or 80 at another place, what's real? The 10 pounds or the 80? Okay? You can, and I can't stand using this word, but I'm not smart enough to come up with a better one, but you can fake down, you can't fake up.
Right.
So in terms of giving a physician or an employer good information about what this individual can do, in those situations where somebody just gives you a 10-pound effort and you have no way of doing another activity very similar, you don't know if 10 is real or 80 is real. And that's huge when it comes to the physician setting restrictions, or an employer determining where in the company or in the factory that this person can work.
Right. So if a person is, let's say a PT clinic is looking to add FCEs to their practice, number one, do you have to be a physical therapist to do an FCE? Number two, how much training is it required to get someone to be able to do an FCE? And are there other tools that you can use other than this ERGOS to do FCEs? What's your...
As I mentioned earlier, there are other tools, but they're not going to give the referral source, typically aren't going to be able to give the referral source the information that they really need reliably, because they don't know whether somebody gave a good effort or not. This particular tool does.
Okay.
So going back to your question, who can do them? Because it's not a medical test in the state of Kentucky, and even in the American Medical Association's disability evaluation textbook, they talk about who's qualified to do an FCE. Physicians. I don't know any physician that actually does the test, but physicians, PTs, OTs, vocational evaluators, and yes, in the AMA's disability evaluation text, they specifically say exercise physiologists, because an exercise physiologist has been through anatomy, physiology, all the kinesiological motions and movements, and if they're in the musculoskeletal field, then they're actually very well qualified to an FCE. Now, with this particular tool, you have to be trained by the company that sells it, so that you are utilizing the tool correctly. So there's obviously some training involved, because if you're not using a tool, then you're really guessing, and it's subjective.
And how long will the training last? Can you have to give me a
Typically
ballpark?
the training is 2 days.
2 days. Okay, so we will show the audience this machine, but in the meantime, what I wanted to tell people is if you are a PT clinic or a clinician that's looking to get into the FCEs or add FCEs to your practice, one of the things that Rick is going to do is in the description we will have a link to Rick so that if you need Rick to be a consultant to you, or if you want him to come out and train your staff about FCEs, he's willing to do that. We'll have that in the link. Kind of your fees and all that will be there. So just keep that in mind to have an expert come and train you and show you how to actually monetize this, because we don't feel, or Rick doesn't feel, that it is being utilized to its capacity, not only just in Kentucky but in other parts of the country as well. So stay to the end, because we're going to go around this machine and show you all of what it does. All right, so now we're at the actual ERGOS machine, and Mr. Pounds is going to show us. It has 5 stations. Each station, I assume, measures something a little bit different, maybe some of the same things. But
a little bit different, but much of this, many of the same things, going back to that cross-validation that I talked about previously.
okay, so tell me a little bit about Station 1 and what this does, and then we'll work our way around.
Station number 1 is typically the longest station, may take, depending on effort of the individual, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half. It really depends on the kind of effort that they give, the number of breaks they take, and those sorts of things. But at station number 1, and again, typically the most physically demanding, these force panels pull down, and they push and pull at various positions. These force panels pull down, and we measure static strength, both pushing and pulling, and then static lifting in various positions. In a modified ankle height, and standard industrial bench height, their anatomic knuckle height, and a shoulder height. Essentially, it's a 4-picture snapshot statically of an actual dynamic lift where they're picking up and lifting the box, because we'll transition from static strength testing then to how we actually work, and that's dynamic strength. So at that point, we would bring over this standard industrial size tote box, which would be placed here, and then the instructions will guide them where to put it. There are wings that go out to the side, so they're not just lifting in the sagittal plane at standard industrial bench and a standard industrial shelf height. And we can modify this if the employer says they got to lift it to a specific height, we can modify that to this. But they'll lift in the sagittal plane, and they'll also lift in the transverse plane, because we don't just work in the sagittal plane. So they'll be doing rotation and lifting at 6 different positions. And again, we'll continue to load them until they say, that's it, I can't do anymore. And at that point, we move on.
Do they see what's in the box when you load it, or is that?
They see what goes. They see things are being added to the box, but they don't know what they weigh. Also, going back to the static strength, they will see a graph or a chart on the screen, but there will be no numbers on the screen, because they're asked to give their maximum safe effort. So then when we transition to dynamic lifting, they don't know how much they're lifting, but they do see these canisters that weigh something different being placed in the box as we continue to move on and challenge them with a load.
And the machine itself gives instructions, so you as the evaluator, or you don't have to do a lot of instruction or coaching.
Yeah, because of the litigious society we live in, you've got to assume everything might be litigated. Well, in terms of defensibility, this particular tool gives instructions both in a written form on the screen and an audible form, and they're the same for every single person. So everyone gets the exact same instructions. If you're deaf, you can see the instructions. If you're blind, you can hear the instructions. So it's also ADA compliant. Okay,
great. All right, so this is the first station. It takes
Station
probably the most.
Typically
time.
the longest and the most physically demanding.
Okay.
All right. Then we'll move to station number 2.
Okay, so we're at station 2 here, Rick, and I see a lot of switches. I see a lot of switches on it and above maybe someone's head. So tell me about station 2.
Station number 2 is where we look at their ability to perform various tasks in various positions. So we'll look at postural movements, where using this upper bar, it's almost like a kid's game. They will be asked to stoop and move the weights along the bars from right to left. Once that is over, they'll kneel down and work, kneeling, and then they'll crouch down and do the same activities. Okay? From looking at those various postures, stooping, kneeling, and crouching, we will move to work forward and overhead reaching. So they'll work in front of them and they'll work overhead. What will pop up on the screen is it's almost like playing the old game Battleship. It'll tell them what row to locate and then give them a pattern, and they're to match that pattern by using the button switches and knobs.
Now, I totally get why you would work in those different positions for the weights, but this seems more mental. This stuff is that?
It's just a cognitive distraction.
Okay, it's a distraction.
But also, particularly if somebody works in a job where they have to stand back at a certain distance to work, and I'll clarify that more in just a moment, or people who have to work overhead, do any overhead motion. Oftentimes, particularly with rotator cuff injuries or whatever, they may have to work overhead, and we can get an idea of what their abilities are in terms of overhead work. So it keeps them busy. It's not saying, okay, now raise your hands and tell me when you can't hold them up there anymore.
Got it.
We give them an actual work task to do in an overhead position.
Right.
Now going back to this, something we didn't mention earlier, not only can you do functional capacity evaluations with this tool, but you can also do work conditioning and work hardening with this particular tool, and all the data are actually measured, so it helps with your documentation, because with an FCE or with the work conditioning, work hardening, it's data in, data out. I can't manipulate the data, so it really helps with your documentation if you're doing work conditioning as well. We also use it for post-offer testing for various employers who they have a job. They'll typically have them go through an interview, a drug screen, and then they want to know if they're physically able of doing the job before they even hire them. And so sometimes, particularly as relates to car manufacturing or whatever, they have to, to reach out, say the back window, get in the back seat and reach to do some work. Well, if we're doing a post-offer test, we know what that distance is that they work, and we'll put tape on the floor, and they will have to get down in a kneeling position at whatever that depth is and do the work. Notice we're matching what the job is, not what the person's body types are. That's irrelevant. The job is the job. So employers want to be able to match physical abilities to the job. So if it's a long reach, they probably don't want to put a little tiny person in that job unless they're, they put themselves at risk at some shoulder and other issues. So we measure to a particular standard, not to a person's body type, but a job standard.
So if you're doing some of those activities like post offers, do you have to use the entire machine, or can you use just a station or two for that?
Just a station 2. One of the employers that we do quite a bit of work with, it's just station 1 and 3.
Okay.
Because it's a very physically demanding, pushing, pulling, lifting, and carrying job.
Is it possible to have more than one person doing a test on the ERGOS? Could you have two doing it at the same time?
I've actually had 3 or 4 people on ERGOS at the same time, where I'm doing an FCE and a couple of post offers all at the same time.
Okay. Well, you were in the introduction, you were talking about how this generates as much income as a therapist that maybe sees 12, 13, 14 patients a day. But it could even do more than that if you're doing multiple things on this.
Absolutely.
Plus, this employee doesn't eat as much. It doesn't take up a lot of...
don't have to pay work comp on it. Don't have to give it vacation time.
Yeah, so I can see how this would be a really good tool
Very good
to have in a clinic.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to station 3. Okay, so we're at station 3. See some stairs here, so tell me a little bit about what the stairs do at station 3.
Station number 3 by name on ERGOS is the work endurance station. But here we're really now starting to put all of it together in terms of cross-validation. We get some of it at Station 2, which I could talk about, but it's more easily to grasp what I'm talking about at Station 3. So at Station 3, it's a work endurance test where they will lift, they will carry, they will walk, they will reach, they will stoop. Many of the same biomechanical motions and movements they've done over the last 2 hours, they're going to be doing all of that again here at Station 3. So ERGOS will start out, he'll tell them which box to get. All these boxes, numbered 1 through 10, they all weigh something different, okay? So they're told to pick a particular numbered box and set it on the table. As they're walking over, they're being told how many yellow balls, red balls, blue balls, and green balls to put in the tote. There will always be a total of 8 in some combination, okay? If they don't remember that combination walking over, they can look back at the screen as much as they want to. That inventory will be on the screen. Why? Cognitive distraction, okay? Plus, it's also, we're seeing them either stoop or kneel or crouch and reach to get the boxes out of the tote, out of the bin. And then they'll pick up the box and they'll walk and climb 2 steps. They will set the tote down on this shelf, which is also a scale that has verified that they picked up the right box.
Okay.
So me as the evaluator and or a monkey, if I'm not paying attention, which I'm always paying attention, but ERGOS won't let them set the wrong box up here.
Okay.
If ERGOS doesn't see that the box they've told them to pick up, they make them do it over.
So do the balls weigh different amounts?
No.
No.
The totes
do. Okay.
So once it's here, they push the red button and it tells them where to put each ball. Upper hole, lower hole in some random combination. Here we get to see them stand, we get to see them reach, but it's also really a rest period because we're going to continue to load them quite significantly as they move on down. Once the ball's in, it tells them to turn and descend the steps, put the tote back where they got it, push the red button, and it tells them which tote to get next. And they continue that sequence until such time as they don't think they can physically do anymore.
Okay. So they effectively stop the test when they feel like they're fatigued or pain has got to the point that they don't want to.
Now let's look at something. If you remember back on paddle number 1, you saw this tote.
Yes.
The exact same tote. Okay. Over there, you saw weight going in it. You asked me that question. You saw weight going in it, but even though you didn't know how much it was, you saw something more loading occur. Over here, all these boxes weigh something different, and they don't know what those weights are.
Okay.
They're just told, just do as many as you can safely do.
So I'm hearing you say this, and my mind says, if they had to stop the test over there with number 1 tote, and let's say it was X, and number 1 tote over here on the high shelf potentially could weigh more than that, and they seem to be able to get that down and move it equally, then there's some inconsistencies.
Absolutely.
From
And
number 1
that goes back to answering that whole question: what's real, what's not.
right. But
Okay.
this is objective. This is not subjective.
No.
So this is.
There's often a variation of what I'm getting ready to say, but on very rare occasion, it can be this dramatic. Some years ago, I had a gentleman terminate his lifting at Station 1 with 100 pounds. Excuse me, with 10 pounds. He did 110 pounds over here.
Okay.
What's real?
Yeah.
10 or 1? Now, that is an extreme case, but it has happened.
Right.
So in terms of an employer knowing what somebody can and cannot do, a physician knowing what they can and cannot do, objectively measured, not a guess, and setting restrictions, in most cases, with most of the tools in the market, he would have said, this person can lift 10 pounds. But we know the person can actually do 110 pounds.
Right.
Those are real dollars when it comes to settlements and 3 multipliers and all kinds of crazy things
Right.
with the insurance and all that. Right. We just provide data for the physician and the employers and the attorneys and all that to, we're just providing the information. Just like an x-ray tech or an MRI tech, they're just taking a picture.
Right.
We're just taking a 3 to 4 hour picture.
Right. Is that about how long this test lasts?
They typically, on a short one, if somebody just comes in and just refuses to do anything, or takes and doesn't take many breaks, a short one would be about 2.5 hours or so. But it can last up to 4 and 5 hours. So when someone says, well, how long is this going to take? We typically tell them 3 to 5 hours.
Okay.
Rarely takes 5, but in some certain situations it can. And I would rather tell them, the long side rather than tell them 2 hours and they're here 5.
Right. So you, as a administrator of the test, 2 a day, is that about what you could do if FCEs?
2 is very reasonable / easy to do. On rare occasions over the last 30 years, I've done 3, but that's just a lot of work.
Okay.
That goes into can you do 2 people, because we do them at 8:30 and 12:30, so we got the one going at 8:30, and if we start one at 10, that first person's on station 2 or 3, and I can start that next person, and the first person's done by the time the second person's getting around, the third person comes in.
Gotcha.
That's a tough day.
Right.
It's doable. Wouldn't advise it unless you just really need to. But 2 is a very doable, 8:30 and 12:30.
I'm starting to see what you were saying though about you're have plenty of cognitive distraction, but you're repetitive on some of the lifts so that you can see inconsistencies.
Correct.
Going forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Station 4. Tell me a little bit about Station 4.
Station number 4, again, starting to tie a lot of tasks together. This station is by definition called standing and walking. If somebody wants to know what an individual's ability to perform standing or walking tasks on a sustained basis, I mean, certainly you can have them stand there and go, okay, tell me when it hurts too bad, or for whatever reason you can't stand there. Like, okay, well, I'm done over here. They're doing activities in which we're measuring standing and walking. But to be able to get that standing and walking measurement, we had to have done Station 2, because what we were doing at Station 2, we were standing while we were doing the forward and overhead reaching tasks. At Station 3, we were walking as we were carrying the box. So you have to do Station 2, 3, and 4 to get a standing and walking tolerance score. Okay. So what they'll be told is to pick up tray number 1, set it down at the end of the conveyor, and when they set this down, they push the foot switch. ERGOS was just measuring walking. Once I set the tray down and push the foot switch, now it's into standing mode, because they will be standing at the side of this box and sorting balls onto the conveyor. This conveyor will be rolling the balls down into the tray. When the tray is full, they push the foot switch again. Now it's back to timing walking. There's 20 trays there that they complete as many as they can do. Most people will do all 20. So again, it's a sequence of standing and walking. Standing and walking is what's being timed here, and those data get inputted and merged with the data at stations 2 and 3 to get the standing and walking tolerance. Besides standing and walking tolerance, we're looking at, once again, at their ability to either stoop, kneel, or crouch to get the balls out of the cart, and also their ability to reach and move.
Right. And all this is being prompted by the computer, correct?
Correct.
So you're just basically watching.
And making sure they keep the right sequence up, that when they set an empty tray down, they hit the foot switch.
Right.
When the tray is full, they hit the foot switch again and are told to take it back. So just make sure they hit the foot switch in the correct sequence.
Okay.
Typically.
So we're 4 stations in. I can
4 stations
certainly see what you're trying to do here, and we got 1 station to go,
One more.
correct?
One more to go.
Let's take a look at that one. So we've made it to the final station, Station 5. Looks like we got a lot going on here. Can you tell me a little bit about what Station 5 is?
Station 5 is what's called a seated work activity, or seated work task activity station, where if we were to do everything on station number 5, which we rarely do for a host of reasons, this would probably take an hour and a half or more just at this station. But we look at their ability to work in a seated posture, okay? Everything from looking at rapid, they don't have to know how to type, but rapid finger flexion, all the fingers in your thumb, right hand, left hand, and then working together, look at both sides of the brain. Then look at their ability to perform work tasks using just their fingers as the primary work instrument, right hand, left hand, and then looking at their ability to do repetitive work tasks using their whole hand as the work instrument. So fingering and handling right and left. Then we move into things such as hand grip. This is a standard JMAR tool or instrument, but we can measure and give the clinician peak effort if they want it, but that's not what they really need. What they need is maximum sustained effort. So what ERGOS will print out is what their maximum sustained effort is, because when we're working and we grip something, it's rare that we grip as hard as we can and then let go.
Right.
So this measures maximum sustained effort over the last 2 seconds of the task.
Right.
Okay. Then we look at their ability to perform. This is the only measurement that we do where somebody is strapped in, because when we're working, I guess unless you're an astronaut or a test dummy, you're not strapped into anything. But we've got to stabilize their forearm, and we look at pronation and supination at 0, 40, and 80 degrees, right and left hand. We can also do flexion extension measurements. And again, all of these static activities, strength activities, are, again, maximum sustained effort. I can go in and print out data that shows what peak was, but that's really not important. What's important is sustained effort. Also, as you see, there's a cord attached to this chair. If you do certain activities, and you have to do all these certain activities to be able to get a seated work tolerance score, because there's sensors in this chair, and it can give you a seated work score as well. This box, if you've got feeling or tactile issues, bring the box down here, and we can look at texture, shape, size, texture, shape, and size by reaching in and identifying various objects in that box, right and left hand. So now, some people thought they were being smart some years ago, and they go, hey, because they didn't want to pay for a whole eval, they'd say, Rick, it's just a hand or forearm. Let's just do a station number 5. And I would say, fine, if you are 100% sure that somebody's going to give you a maximum effort. And they go, what are you talking about? When I stick this JMAR in your hand, you know what I'm measuring. So if you don't want to give a good effort, you don't have to.
Right.
And that happens a lot. I'll have somebody carry a 60-pound box and then come over here and give me a 2 or 3 pound hand grip. Okay, so unless you know somebody's going to give you a maximum effort, you better do it all, because they know what you're measuring when you hand them a JMAR, but they don't realize when you're lifting and carrying a tote box, you're using what's called an opposing grip position. All right, so you're measuring grip when you're lifting and carrying a box. If you're using a bilateral power hook grip, when they're doing the pulling, station 1, when they're pulling, that's grip.
Right.
Okay, so probably not auto request, because I typically won't do it anyway. Just a panel 5. You've got to put everything together to get the full picture.
I totally understand.
That'd be like needing to take a picture of the arm and just taking a picture up here and not down here and looking at the whole thing.
Right. So we've gone through 1 through 5. I've got a pretty good picture of what you're trying to measure. I can see how if you're a person that maybe had preconceptions of what you were trying to do, this machine is probably going to expose those if you're somebody who maybe weren't trying to give maximum effort. So
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah, if you're not giving a full, maximum, reliable effort, this will identify that. And then the physicians and case managers, employers, and they can fight all that out.
Right.
But the data are the data.
All right. Well, let's sit down and get a conclusion. But thank you for showing me the ERGOS. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about FCEs. You've given me the tour of the ERGOS, and as you were giving me the tour, I was thinking there's a couple other things that I probably should have asked you at the beginning, but I'll ask them now. But it's obviously a revenue generator for your practice.
Correct.
And there's lots of ways that it can be a revenue generator for your practice. But as you were demonstrating some of this stuff, I was thinking there are clinicians, like physicians and case managers and even lawyers, I could see, that there are cases that this would be handy for them to have that information. Can you speak a little bit to physicians or people that...
Sure. Particularly for physicians, they are asked routinely by the payors, hey doc, when are you going to release this person? Can they go back to work? They ask them that full scope of things. When can they go back to work? What can they do? Are there any restrictions? What's their impairment? Well, they can either guess, and set things, which unfortunately many do, or they can get actual objective data to help them make very reliable determinations as to what somebody can do. So, and it also gives them cover. They can guess about what somebody can do, and it may be too high or too low, but if they actually measure it, then they've got hard data to fall back on. I said they could do this because this is what they did. That's why I made that recommendation. That's why I set this restriction, because we had reliable and objective data for me to set that, and I didn't just have to guess. Same way with attorneys, both defense and plaintiff. There's always the issue: can the person go back and do the job? If they can't, what can they do? And so if the defense and the plaintiff attorney are interested in correct, objective, reliable data, they'll get a measurement. Then they can fight about what does that mean in dollars, but we'll actually measure what somebody can do.
Right. Well, I hope the audience finds this fascinating, because number one, I found the whole process fascinating, and number two, I'm really surprised that this isn't something that you see more of, because it does give you concrete information about a person's abilities. And I would think, number one, the person would want to know what they can safely do, and number two, the employer wants to put them in a position where they can do something safely. So obviously this is something that you've done a lot of. You're an expert at it. So again, information will be in the description. If you would like to talk to Rick about getting some training, we'll have all that information there. And just want to thank Rick for having us today, and hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed learning about the ERGOS. So we'll see you next time.